Hey, Mike here with Canadian Musician. On the line with me is Canadian country star Deric Ruttan. How you doing, Deric?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me.
No worries, no worries. And so your latest album, Take the Week Off, came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and looks to be a huge success once again. I guess, how was the recording process with this album? I know you recorded it down in Nashville with Luke Wooden, so how was that?
It was great. You know, I've lived in. I'm from Bracebridge, Ontario originally, but I've lived in Nashville for 19 years, and so I've done all my records there. It was great. I've done the last 3 records I've done. Luke has, the last 3. Luke has engineered and mixed, and this was the first one that he and I co-produced. Mm-hmm. And you know, it was a great process. He's an old friend. He's a dear friend, and he recently had done a lot of work with. He mixed the last couple of Brad Paisley records, and Kelly Pickler and Dustin Lynch, and he'd worked on a lot of the Dierks Bentley records, and so we had that sort of in common. But it was a great process, just very, very smooth and creative and good.
When you're co-producing, obviously with you and Luke, I guess, is there a division of labors, or I guess how do you decide whose preference wins out when you are, I guess, both manning the helm there?
Well, because I produced the last 3 records before this on my own, I mean, Luke knows that I'm fully capable of producing a record, so yeah. I think it was, you know, he's the kind of artist that, or the kind of producer, co-producer that is always going to default to the artist, yeah. If the artist is the producer too. And so there wasn't really, I mean, he wanted to hear the songs that we were going to record, but honestly, he kind of left that completely up to me, and so song selection was what I brought to the table. And then once we got in there and started mixing, I mean, that was sort of his domain, although I was there for every step of the process. And I tend to be kind of a little bit, some people have used the word neurotic, Mike. I don't know if that's the word I'd use. I think, someone who cares a lot about the craft is more how I would describe it. But I would, you know, we would go in, we'd mix a song, and then I would go home and I would listen in my truck at home, and various environments, come back with, as Luke would say, copious notes, and we'd do these tweaks, and often the versions that make it onto the record would be, you know, mix 3, 4, 5 of any given song, and all just probably minor tweaks that only I would know about or hear. But hey, you know, it's my face on the cereal box, as they say. So, but it was overall, it was just a great process.
Of course, and like you said, you take lots of notes while listening to the various mixes. But is there specifics within those mixes then that you're looking for, even as you said, you might be the only one that notices them?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's about, I mean, it's just everything. It's primarily, because it's country music, it's primarily about the story. It's about the lyric. So I want to be able to hear everything, but not have the vocal so loud that it's like the mix loses its sort of rock and roll edge, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I also am a big fan of, even though I'm not a drummer, I did play drums in high school, so I'm that's kind of the first thing my ear goes to is drums, oddly enough, because I'm a guitar player. But I go to the rhythm, and I go to sort of the rhythmic current that weaves its way through the song, and I want to feel that. I want to feel that that's supporting the lyric, and then I go to guitars, and it's really just everything, you know, and it's subtle things. To me, it's like a painting. I mean, it's every brush stroke counts, even though the layman might not see the little brush strokes on the canvas. The artist sure does. Yeah. And I wholeheartedly believe that all of those things, you know, point to a stronger, you know, better product, even if it's in ways that the listener can't detect or doesn't recognize. I think it all sort of adds up to to a better final mix.
Interesting. And in one of the behind-the-scenes videos that you posted online about the making of Take the Week Off, you kind of made an offhand comment in there about, I think it was the video was taken the first morning you started recording, something along those lines. But you had made mention of how you were up late choosing what songs you were going to start recording, which makes me wonder, how many songs did you have in the bank for this album, and how did you go about whittling it down to the ones you would record?
Well, about two and a half years ago, I switched publishing companies, and I signed with a new company in Nashville called This Music, THIS, This Music. And I always find whenever I switch companies, which hasn't happened that often, but when I do, when there's some sort of creative shift like that in my life, it generates songs, it generates activity. And so when I made my last record, which was called Up All Night, Deric Ruttan Live,
yes,
record we cut at the Calgary Stampede, that was sort of right when I signed at this company. So basically I've written, long story short, I've written more songs in the last 2.5 years than I have in any other 2.5 year period of my career. So I had a lot more songs to choose from when I made Take the Week Off. And so it was really a process. It was harder this time than I think it has been any other time in the past. And I think that's just because of the volume, and because I was also writing in a new company, so I was trying to impress them. So maybe the writing was better. I like to think it was, or is. I do believe this is the strongest collection of songs I've ever had on a record.
Yes.
But I think that was the reason why I was up so late the night before that, and I'm incredibly indecisive. And I also I was the same way in high school. I just procrastinated like crazy.
Yes.
And so it's still the same, man. And so I was literally up at my desk like going, well, I could do this. Does this song fit? I don't know. And that's the kind of thing that had I got those songs to Luke earlier, he could have probably weighed in and helped me choose. But he did weigh in on a few that were favorites of his. But yeah, man, that was no lie. I was literally the night before, up until 1 a.m, deciding which songs to cut.
When you're doing that, are you simply looking for the 12 best songs, or are you looking for songs that fit together as a cohesive sound for a record?
I think it's all of that. I think knowing especially how single-driven our market has become, and music in general. I mean, the kids today they're not an album generation; they're a playlist generation, and they'll buy singles before they'll buy records. And it's, to me, it's not unlike pre-Sgt. Pepper's with the Beatles, when it was all singles. It was 45s, and you would buy these 45s, and then artists would release albums when they had a collection of singles that people had already heard. And so it's nothing new, really. But I think because of that sort of single mentality, I do kind of default to best song wins.
Yeah.
But also they have to sound, so that's thing one. But thing two is that they do have to sound like they belong on the same record. And there were songs that I think were, honestly, there are some songs in my catalog that were maybe better songs than a couple of the songs on the record, or might be better quote-unquote radio hits, but I left them off this record because I just didn't think thematically they fit sort of the character of what this album was becoming.
In a situation like this where you have a lot of leftover songs, do you hold on to them for the next record, or do they then become songs that are up for grabs for others?
I don't. My rule is I don't hang on to anything, ever.
Really?
Yeah, never. Because here's the deal. In my experience, it is so hard to get my day to day when I'm not, making my own records and touring like I am now. I'm actually talking to you from the back of a tour bus in Calgary. We're on the Your Town Throwdown tour with Jason Blaine and Chad Brownlee. So we're almost done. 25 dates across the country. But anyway, we wrap up at the Commodore Ballroom in Vancouver on Friday night. But that's another interview. But when I'm not doing this, when I'm not touring and so forth, my day to day is I'm in Nashville and I'm writing, and I've got a little workspace, little office on Music Row, and I go in and I do it 4 or 5 days a week. And I've been pretty fortunate over my career to get some cuts by other people, but they've been they've been very disproportionate to the number of shots I've taken and the number of songs I've written.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line, it's very, 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 very hard to get a cut in Nashville on a major country artist, and so I've learned over the years to not hold on to anything, because chances are they're not going to cut it anyway. Mm-hmm. So I just pitch everything and see what happens. And often the songs that you swear, people are going to love, they don't, and then someone will cut something that you're a little surprised that they cut. And in the end, it's kind of two separate things. It's very rarely, and I think this differentiates me from a lot of other artists, maybe not for the better, I don't know, but I never, well, I shouldn't say never, only a handful of times in my career have I written something with the specific intention of me recording that song.
Okay.
Almost always I sit down with a co-writer, like with the current single, Take the Week Off. I wrote that with my buddy Ryan Tyndall, and we'd known each other for 10 years. We hadn't written in probably 5. Mm-hmm. We got together and we wrote that song, and I was, initially my publisher pitched it, and we had some people take it on hold and put it on hold, but it never got cut. And then when it came time to make my record, and I'm reflecting back over these songs, it was actually my publisher, Rusty Gaston, who said, "Man, you ought to think about cutting Take the Week Off. That's a pretty solid. That sounds like a hit to me." And
yeah.
And so I did. But that's interesting, because and maybe that goes back to best song wins, because I never am thinking of myself as the artist when I'm writing, or again, rarely. And so then you're trying to write to get on the radio, to get mm-hmm. Kenny Chesney to record it, or Tim McGraw, or whoever to record it. So that's your bar, and hopefully that helps the songs to be all that they can be.
Interesting. Because there are songs on your album that you're the lone writer on, as well as obviously the others that you co-wrote. How does your approach to writing change between writing with others and writing by yourself?
Well, I think when you write by yourself, yeah, you're referring to a song on the new record called What a Memory, and then on my last record, on the live record, we had 4 new studio tracks, one of which was called Main Street 1979, that I wrote by myself as well, right?
Which is a pretty big hit on Canadian country radio.
It was, yeah, and we did a cool video for it, and I'm really proud of that song. And I think the difference in how you approach writing when you're writing by yourself, at least for me, is I can kind of take my time a little bit more. I feel like often in co-writing in the current sort of culture of Nashville is, and this is me too, this is not, I'm not talking about others, I'm talking about me too when I'm in this situation, but the current culture is hurry up and get it done. Yeah. And people often expect to get a song in a day. Some guys will write 2 songs in a day. I'm not that guy. I never have been that guy. I'll write a song in a day, and I've had hits that have been written in one day, but more often than not, it's a couple sessions to do it. And when I'm writing by myself, I'll let a song just kind of percolate. Often it'll be in a quiet moment, mm-hmm. Either in my office or in my office at my house. And I'll just pick up my guitar and start noodling, and something will come out. And there'll just be something about it that's like, it's either intensely personal, or there's a level of intimacy, just a quality of intimacy about the subject matter of the song, mm-hmm. or the melody, that I think that I should just let it kind of be what it is and not introduce a co-writer into the mix. Because often when you introduce a co-writer, you both tend to write for the radio, and which I need that. I mean, I've been able to put food on the table for my wife and 5 kids by getting, songs on the radio. Yeah. That's been my bread and butter. But often, like with What a Memory and Main Street 1979, I wrote both of those without a thought for radio. I was just trying to write just to serve the song and serve the idea. So I think, mm-hmm. long answer to your short question, and I apologize, is I try to, I take my time with it, and I'm not in a rush to finish it, mm-hmm. and I just kind of zone out and get into this place where I talk to myself a lot and play the guitar and mumble, and mm-hmm. and I don't settle, and I don't put that that pressure on myself of, oh, I've got to be done by 5 o'clock, or I've got to be done by next Wednesday. I just kind of let it naturally evolve, and that's a luxury you're often not afforded in most co-write situations.
Yeah, and that's an interesting observation about the songwriting culture in Nashville. As you were saying, it's hurry up and get it done, as you put it. Is that something that's unique to Nashville, have you found, or is that just the way of the music industry now?
You know, I don't know, because I haven't written much outside of Nashville, to be honest with you. I've got friends who fly out to L.A. and write for pop projects, and of course friends here in Canada who make their own records and write here. I've never done that. You know, I've always sort of been in Nashville doing my writing. I don't know that it's unique, and I don't think it is. Just from what I've heard from friends of mine who've gone out to Los Angeles and written for pop records, it's often that same thing, and often it's like 2 songs a day. If anything, it might be quicker.
Yeah.
You know, it might be a little bit more like they feel this need to rock on and kind of get it done. But I don't know. To me, that's not letting the song dictate what the song needs to be. That's letting your watch dictate what the song needs to be. And that, to me, that doesn't make good art, you know?
Yeah. And as you're saying, you've had some major radio hits, and just lately you've had, you co-wrote the song, Mine Would Be You, which has become a big hit for Blake Shelton.
Yeah.
Do you get the same, or I guess, how's the satisfaction of getting a hit in that regard compared to having a hit that you perform yourself?
Well, they're kind of 2 different things. I mean, the Blake song, that Mine Would Be You, I just actually, before this conversation, I got a text from my publisher saying it was #1 for the 2nd week in America.
Wow.
And, and it's been #1 in Canada for like 3 weeks, I think.
Yes.
But, so it's awesome. But I mean, they're kind of different things. Obviously, the financial rewards of having a #1 on a guy like Blake Shelton or whoever it's easy to get excited about that, because I'm a very practical guy. I mean, I said from the beginning, before I had a hit or a record deal or anything, if I can just make enough money to provide for my family and not have to get a quote unquote real job, that's my goal. And so far I've done that. So that's why I do it, is to make a living and provide a life. I mean, you know, some guys get up and they swing a hammer, and that's what they feel like they were called to do, and they're doing it to put food on the table, and I'm no different, but I build songs, you know. And as far as the level of satisfaction, it's great. I mean, #1s are awesome, and this is my 2nd #1 in America. 10 years ago, I had one with Dierks Bentley on a song called What Was I Thinking? And it's hard to believe it's 10 years, but dude, it's been 10 years. So I know these things don't come along every day.
Yeah.
And I've been pretty fortunate to have one every 2 or 3 years in the States. Not a #1, but, you know, have a top 20, and then have a top 10, have a top 5. So, you know, I've been pretty blessed in that regard. But you know, I can't really say one is more satisfying than the other, because then I'll be here in Canada doing a show, and someone will come up to me, like they did the other night in Winnipeg on this tour. This woman will come up to me in line, and she'll, like, as she's taking my hand, she's tearing up, and she's telling me how much Main Street 1979 meant to her and her family, and she had lost her father to, you know, cancer, and which I touch on in that song with losing my grandfather, and that was just such a personal song, and other people hear their stories reflected in it. And I mean, I can't say which is more satisfying, because that, to me, that human connection that you have from a song that you sing as well as wrote, that someone identifies with, is pretty potent. I have no idea whether I answered your question, Mike. I probably did not, and I apologize.
No, it's still interesting. And actually, in that regard, with you mentioned earlier that your songs and country songs, in large part, are story songs, and those stories obviously can connect with people, like they did with that woman in Main Street 1979. But where do those stories come from for you? Are they always personal, to come from a personal place, or are they stories that you imagine? How does that process work?
You know, I honestly wish I could answer that question. I don't know. I think that I'm reading this very interesting. I'm actually rereading this interesting book by Stephen King called On Writing, where he talks about his writing process, and he actually touches on that subject in the book, and he says, and I'm going to paraphrase, and I'm probably going to butcher what he said, but the idea was a good writer doesn't find, quote unquote, their ideas anywhere. A good writer recognizes one when it falls out of the air, and they just write it down. And that's, to me, I get that, and I think it applies to songwriting too. The ability to develop your songwriting antenna so that when someone says something, or that when a thought enters your head, and who knows from where, you have developed your spidey sense enough to know that it's a great idea and to write it down or remember it. So I don't know. I mean, I've been sitting in rooms with a guitar in my hand and just, they're all different, man. You hit a little riff on a guitar and it puts your mind in a certain spot, and then you start mumbling something that sounds like something, and then your co-writer says, "Did you just say this?" And you go, "No." And you go, "Well, I thought you said this." "Oh, well, I like that." And then you don't know. I mean, and then suddenly you take off. Yeah. Now, it's different with a song like Main Street 1979, because that was a very personal story, as was, well, I mean, that's probably the most personal I've ever written and recorded. And with that one, I just kind of wanted to, when I wrote the first verse and the song kind of indicated to me what it was meant to be, I decided to just let it be that and write it truthfully and not deviate from the truth. Because for me, I just kind of wanted a story that was real for me and my family. Again, not thinking about the radio or thinking about anything like that. So, I mean, in that case, the idea came from real life, and often the ideas do, but like Willie Nelson said one time, when you write a song, you start with the truth and go from there. And I think what that means to me is we're songwriters, we're not journalists. Our job is to entertain and create and tell compelling stories. And so you're going to pull from your own life because that's what your inclination will be. Yes. But at the end of the day, you just want to write the most compelling song you can for people. And sorry to kind of repeat on this, but it's very interesting. But it sounds like this could go both ways, but not necessarily where does the story come from, but when you start off writing a song, do you have the story in your mind, or once you start writing, a story emerges, or does it work both ways? Often for me, almost never will I do scenario one, where I get a story in my mind and I go, oh, I want to write that in a song. Yeah, okay. To me, that just doesn't sound interesting. It's almost, because to me, it's about the process. It's about the journey. It's about the mystery of picking up the guitar and stumbling upon a seed of an idea and just kind of starting to sing and starting to think and just letting that creative process do what it does and taking that trip and taking that journey. And often it'll become something different than you might have thought it would be. But you kind of let the song be what it's supposed to be. And so I think scenario two of what you just said is more what I often do. I think the first one would be boring because then it's almost like an assignment. Okay, here's the story. Now write it. It's like, I don't think so. I think I'm going to go, practice scales or something. Or watch, catch up on Everybody Loves Raymond, something, Duck Dynasty, anything just to get away from that. No, I'm just kidding. But
no, I see your point. Very interesting. Before we wrap up here, I'm just interested, within all this talk of songwriting here, who were your original influences? Who made you want to start writing in the first place?
Well, probably the first time I became aware that there was a thing called songwriting was when I my mom and Dad had a record called Cosmo's Factory by Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Funny enough, I listened to that record just the other day.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh, that's one of my all-time favorite records. And I think it was my mom's record. And I would sit when I was a little kid and listen to that record. I mean, they had a lot of records, but that was the one that stuck out to me.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at the label, and under all these songs in parentheses was J.C. Fogerty. Mm-hmm. J.C. Fogerty. J.C. Fogerty. And somehow I put together that he had written all those songs and was the lead singer of that band, John Fogerty. And then in high school, I got into, but I was also into bands that wrote their own material, like the Eagles, Don Henley and Glenn Frey, John Mellencamp, Tom Petty, these guys who wrote their own material. And then in my, I think last year or second to last year of high school, I got a hold of Steve Earle's Copperhead Road record, and that record changed my life. That album, and I've said this before, but it was kind of like the doorway through which I walked into country music, because here was a guy who was singing things musically and melodically that were kind of rock and roll-ish, had a rock edge to them, yes. But lyrically they were country songs, and he was telling a story and painting these vivid pictures with words, but in a way that had more of a rock and roll edge to it that I could relate to. And so that album really kind of did it. So I mean, all those people that I just described were influential. Steve was probably the most influential of everybody. And then when I got to Nashville, I mean, it was like the floodgates were open, and it was all these songwriters who were writing these great songs for people like, Don Schlitz, who wrote The Gambler for Kenny Rogers, and I mean, the list goes on. I mean, Gary Burr and Jim Photoglow and Bob McDill, who wrote all those great Don Williams tunes, Good Old Boys Like Me and Amanda, and so just it was a plethora of people after that, but those were sort of my earlier influences.
Interesting. And as you were just saying, it sounds like your earliest influences or stuff you're a fan of early on in your life were more rock-oriented than country-oriented until you found that Steve Earle album, as you were saying. You also said with Steve Earle...
Yeah, absolutely, it was.
And you also said with Steve Earle, he was recording these songs that had a rock edge, but lyrically they were country songs. So is there something there that defines what country music is? And do you ever find yourself writing something that's more what you would consider a rock song than a country song?
I don't know. I've never tried to sit down and write a quote unquote rock song. I just kind of sit down and write. I mean, I think I could, but I think that I just kind of write now. I mean, doing this 20 years, I just kind of sit down and write what I write. Mm-hmm. And if I'm writing in Nashville with a co-writer, I mean, sometimes there is targeting that goes on, like, George Strait's looking, let's try and write a George Strait song. And that almost never works, but you still end up writing a cool song, that someone may or may not cut at some point. And I have had some songs that way. But as far as a song that defines country, I don't know. It's kind of like, I think in country music, thing one is always the story and the obligation that the writer and the singer have to communicate an idea effectively to its audience, to their audience. And I think, to me, that's what defines country. It's more about singing. It's not singing down from a gilded stage on high. It's singing straight across to the guy at the bar who just worked 40 hours and he's having a beer on Friday. It's singing a relatable message to that guy, and as country musicians and songwriters, I think we have an obligation to be clear in our message and just to speak the truth, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a more intimate ballad or whether it's a more of a party song, more of a let loose kind of party deal. And I think there are several of those moments on my new record. take the week off. I think people who kind of know me from the guy who sings Up All Night and Good Time, my duet with Dirk Bentley, I mean, some of those more rock and party songs, I think there are those types of songs on this record, in songs like Pass It Around, which is the next single, or Take the Week Off itself. And then there's more intimate moments like we talked about earlier, like What a Memory, or The Space Between is another one that is kind of, the space between on this new record kind of reminds me of That's How I Want to Go Out, which was a sort of a big song for me a few years back. But okay, now I'm way off topic. I don't even remember the original question. Sorry, dude.
No worries, no worries.
I got talking and I got lost out among the weeds. I apologize.
No worries. That sometimes brings about the most interesting stuff anyways. But anyways, Deric, I've kept you longer than I told you I would, but so thanks a ton for giving me your time. But we're going to wrap up here. But who or where, since you, as you mentioned earlier, you're on the road right now, where can people see you over the next while?
Well, I'm out right now on the Your Town Throwdown tour with Chad Brownlee and Jason Blaine. It's almost done. We've got, and I don't have the dates in front of me, but we're this week we're in Kelowna, BC, Kamloops, BC, and then we wrap it up November 15th at the Commodore Ballroom in Vancouver, and then I'm back to Nashville. And then I'm off to do a video for the new single, and then I'm pretty much done after this tour. After the Vancouver show, I'm done until probably the spring. But folks can always check out the website, which is DericRuttan.net, DericRuttan.net, or my Twitter, which is just at Deric Ruttan. Check those out for tour dates, and yeah, come see me on the road. But thanks for your time today, man. This was a lot of fun.
No worries, man. Thank you. And for the listeners, Deric's new album, Take the Week Off, is out there in stores. If you're into country music or just great songwriting in general, check it out. It's awesome. Deric, thanks a ton, man.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it, man.
No worries.